Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Music and Moonsaults. I am your host, Chris Bourdine. You can follow me on Twitter at IbanezChris and like me on Facebook, facebook.com/Music and Moonsaults. And audio, if you want to listen to the audio, anchor.fm/Christopher-Bourdine5. Thank you. And then on this video here, if you want to click that little thumbs up, give me a like. I would like that very much. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I'm trying to get to just a measly 100 followers so I can make a custom URL and make it easier for you people to find me. Help me help you. That's what I want. Today, Joel Pearl is back. For a third time. And the second time in 3 months because, as we mentioned a couple months ago, some things might look familiar today if you watched our discussion about the Load album from Metallica. Today we're talking about the album that came before Load, which is the Black Album. And it's 30 years of the Black Album, believe it or not. And I mean, the song Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Wherever I May Roam, The Unforgiven, Nothing Else Matters. Those songs are classics. They're timeless. Some of them, Enter Sandman being one, you kind of like, I don't want to listen to the song again. But you can't deny how freaking great it is. This is a top 10 album for me. Overall, like, out of every album that I've ever listened to, this is a top 10 album. So Joel, he's going to talk about it. He's going to give the perspective from a massive Metallica fan about what was going on during the both the before and the after the album's release, and it's just a really great time. I love talking music with Joel. He's a great dude and a fellow bass player, and he's just awesome. So please keep it rolling here, and Joel will be here to talk about the Black Album. Sit tight. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we have Joel Pearl back today. We are both totally just happened to wear the same clothing we wore 2 months ago when we talked about the Load album. Totally not recorded on the same day at all.
No, not at all.
How are you today,
I always
Joel?
wear this Motorhead shirt.
Yes.
I always wear this Motorhead shirt. I don't know what you're talking about. You're always wearing that gray sweater in the middle of the summertime.
Sleeves in August, all the time.
Yeah, I feel it. I'm great. I'm here. I'm ready. I love it. Thank you for having me again to talk about some more Metallica, one of my favorite bands of all time. I'm excited.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm great. Unlike Load, which, I was familiar with a lot of the, some of the material on it. This album, the Black Album, I don't know it by heart, but it's even as a casual Metallica fan, it's in my top 10 albums. It's a nearly perfect album, in my opinion. It's great, and we're going to talk about how great it is today. So yeah, 30 years of the Black Album.
It's crazy to think about, and we mentioned it in the 25 years of Load. That 30 years comes up, slaps you in the face. I was, how old was I? 91. I was probably about 6 years old.
Yeah.
So
I turned 6 like the month after this came out. So
yeah. So next thing you know, we're 30 years deep. And I mean, listen, you want to figure that why this album is probably part of your top 10 and so recognizable amongst everyone is because Billboard's had it on the charts for over 580 weeks. That's insanity to think about.
It's like sold a lot of albums, Joel. They've sold a lot of copies.
Yeah, 1 or 2 in its time. Yeah. I've said this to you before, like 4th longest charting album in Billboard history. That's insanity.
Yes. And because this is the first time we've had this conversation, totally, What per se are the other albums ahead of it?
Let's give it to you like this. It's Journey's Greatest Hits, it's Bob Marley and the Wailers Legends album, and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Those are some pretty good records, some pretty good company to be up with when you're talking about the top 4
Yes.
longest charting albums in Billboard history. That's
Yes.
pretty good.
According to Wikipedia, which we don't, sometimes is more accurate than not, or not accurate more than it is accurate, however you want to say that. Um, uh, but it says over 16 million in the U.S. sold to date. So that's a lot.
Makes sense to me.
That is a
Yeah.
lot. I think I've personally bought it 3 times myself. Because I bought it on CD once, and then it got stolen, and that's a story for another time. And then I bought it a few years back because I'm like, I think I needed to I had like a gift card or something, and I needed to spend some money in a store, and I'm like, I like this album, I'll buy it again, no problem. And then I decided to get rid of all my CDs because they were just taking up space, and instead decided to start collecting vinyl. So I bought it on vinyl recently too. So what do you do?
Not a bad way to add to Metallica's money load.
Exactly. They don't have enough, so I got to give them some more. I mean,
that's right. You got to support the artists in this tough time known as the
yes.
pandemic, at least as we're getting out of it.
So,
I bought the Black Album. Man, I had to have been 13. I bought it at Music World in Ottawa, Canada, where I grew up. And I was trying to get all of the albums at the time. So I think the Black Album was one of the last ones I got. And I know I got Saint Anger as a birthday present. It was one that I wanted too.
yes.
So just in case you want to ask who the hell is this guy, I asked for the Saint Anger album. Wow. You can turn off the video now. I'm sorry. Wow. Or leave a like or leave a comment and be like, this guy's a total dick.
Yes, please. Please do that.
Do that. Don't turn it off.
No, Joel's a good guy. So, I just lost my train of thought now. So okay, August 12th, 1991. We are just before the explosion of grunge. I believe Nevermind comes out the following month. And that really, kind of sets that movement off. And we're like in between, on the tail end of the quote unquote hair metal. There's a couple bands still hanging on during this time. It hasn't completely phased out yet. Where's Metallica at?
So Metallica had just released And Justice for All in about 1988, and they toured on it, and they saw growth, but they were just seeing the same fans. They released the one video that gained them some traction, but they weren't getting the commercial success that they were hoping for, partially because of the way the albums were being recorded and produced. There were certain things you couldn't hear, like the bass guitar. It wasn't as full or commercially ready. Yeah, exactly.
Boo.
So next thing
gotta hear the bass.
You gotta bring the bass. That's what we're here for. That's what made us fans.
Especially,
so next thing,
not to interrupt, but especially that's gotta be a mind F to Jason, because he's brand new, replacing a legend who sadly passed away in Cliff Burton. It's his first album recording with Metallica, and it comes out, and it could have been you or me. Like, no, you wouldn't be able to tell who, if there was, I mean, obviously you can tell there's bass there, but you know what I mean? Like it's so like, it's a very shrill sounding record.
It is. And Jason at the time, like you said, he was brought in, he replaced Cliff. And I think Jason I know for a fact, he wasn't comfortable. He said it himself. He didn't know to say no. He didn't know to stick up for himself. He just came and he played the parts. He doubled the guitar parts. So things were kind of just lost in the mix. And then you had the dynamic between James and Lars, where they were both trying to one up each other in the mix. It was like, give me more guitar, give me more drums, and all of a sudden there was no bass. And through the passage of time and through some of the video games that have come out, like Rock Band, you've seen that they've been able to pick out the bass parts, the original bass parts from these games, and remix them into these albums. So there's something out there on YouTube. It's called And Justice for Jason, and it's a remixed version of And Justice for All, but it includes the bass, and it sounds so much better.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen other people do this for Metallica records. They did it for Saint Anger. Get rid of those tinny, garbage can drums, replace them with fuller, regular mic'd kits, and all of a sudden the album is listenable. You can do things like that now because that's what the internet, that's what we can do with technology.
Yes,
So
yes.
I do recommend that anyone who's interested in listening to And Justice for Jason, go out and do it after you watch this video, because it is just leaps and bounds above the original production of And Justice for All. But we're talking about the Black Album.
Yes.
They go into the studio, they're looking for something new, and they bring in Bob Rock. And Bob Rock had just worked on Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood, and that was a huge success for them.
Very successful.
That was one of Bob Rock's like seminal albums, and then lo and behold, he gets Metallica. And first of all, he didn't even know if he was going to work with Metallica, because he was asked. First of all, he had worked on Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. He was one of the engineers. He was asked by Richie Sambora, who was a friend of his, if he wanted to do his solo album, and it was at the same time as Metallica was about to do the Black Album. Mm-hmm. So he's trying to make the decision. Bob Rocky goes away, and he's talking about like he saw a kid on the side of the street in like Mexico, wherever he was on vacation, wearing a Metallica shirt, and he's like, the signs were everywhere. And he goes in and he does the Metallica album, and it turns out to be one of the best decisions he ever makes, and at the same time one of the worst decisions he ever makes, because there's just there's a butting heads dynamic that goes on over the next few years, and we'll get into that as we talk through the album. But that's kind of where Metallica is.
Yeah, he does. You mentioned he does work on the Slippery When Wet album, which came out in '86. And then he starts producing. He does Motley Crue, Dr. Feelgood in '89. And then right before the Black Album, he does a David Lee Roth record, A Little Ain't Enough. Oh, yeah. So just give you a taste of what he brought to the table for them.
Yeah, it was going to change Metallica's way of playing. It was going to change Metallica's way of recording. We'll talk about the bass on the album and what Bob Rock brought to that. And he's another bass player. Yes. He was a guy who saw that style and wanted Jason to, he told him, stop thinking like a guitar player, start thinking like a bass player. Mm-hmm. Probably the best advice he could have ever given anyone at the time.
Yep. So, is there any more backstory you wanna lay on us before we get into the album itself?
There's a lot that comes afterwards, and a lot of stuff that they're dealing with throughout the album, but I think it will come across more organically as we talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like we did, I'm gonna pull up. We're gonna go through the singles first. Just get those out of the way. They're probably 5 of the most played songs on rock radio at this point. It's borderline ridiculous.
It's almost half the album.
Yeah. In late July of 1991, Enter Sandman was released. Just a monster song. That song's everywhere. Wrestling Connection. The Sandman from ECW was his theme song in ECW. If you were fortunate enough to actually watch that as it happened, now if you go back and watch it, it's not there, because ECW didn't exactly use it legally. But anyways,
they tried. No, they didn't. They knew what they were doing. But man, that was an iconic entrance song.
Yes.
And an iconic song in and of itself. The Toronto Maple Leafs rhyme, and I'm not a Leafs fan, but I live in Toronto, and that was their entrance music. That was their step onto the ice music, and
Yes.
people were always jazzed up for that. So
I am a New York Yankees fan, and Mariano Rivera, the legendary closer, that was whenever he came out of the bullpen, that was the song they played for him. So
that video, that Sandman video on YouTube, 471 million views.
that's a lot. That's a
That's
lot.
crazy. And there are we're going to get to the other singles, and we'll talk about the views on that, but that's right in the middle of the view count.
Yes. Um,
Insanity.
the most iconic part of that video is at the end, or towards the end, when it's the main riff starts over, just the guitar, and the semi comes through and it smashes into the bed right as James goes, oh. Just
You don't forget that.
awesome.
You never forget that.
No.
Yeah. So what I love about that song too is, going back to the Bob Rock stuff, this was like the first taste of Bob trying to challenge James. James is a control freak, and we've talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
James does not like to relinquish control on product on anything he does. When he's the writer of a song, it is his way or the highway. And so Sandman was about crib death, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it was going. And the lyrics were so dark and so grim, to the point where both Lars and Bob Rock went to James and tried to challenge him and say, make them less grim. Let's do better. And James was like, that made me work harder. It was no longer about like, F you, I'm going to do it my way. He started to want to collaborate and find ways to do better, because he understood what the task at hand was. And obviously it worked, because that song is insane.
Well, it's so masterfully crafted too, especially when you consider it as the opening song of the album. Like the way it just builds until finally it just punches you right in the face, and we're on a ride for the rest of the 5.5 minutes song, which it doesn't feel like this song is 5.5 minutes when you hear it. Like,
you're right.
But
it's all in the intro.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's where it all sits.
Pretty much.
But yeah, it does. It punches you in the face. That's exactly it, and it's such a good driving tune. Like, do you know the whole story, like the Sandman fable, as it was, like what the Sandman was?
Vaguely, but go ahead and refresh people who may not know.
I mean, same here. It was from what I read, it was like an American tale where if you were a child and you couldn't sleep, the Sandman would show up and rub sand in your eyes. So it was like a children's villain.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah.
You were scared of the Sandman. And Lars Ulrich, who grew up he's Danish, right? Yes. So he grew up in Denmark. He was like, I don't get it. He didn't know about the Sandman. So once James explained it to him, he was like, oh, I get it now. And like, he was on board, and he was 100% of the way. So I love the idea of just being like, I don't get it. I'm not from here.
Right.
Little Lars just being like, what the F is this?
Yeah.
Oh, what's this? What's this Sandman?
About? Yeah.
Yeah. So Sandman definitely had a very interesting story kind of coming into it, that again, the lyrics were so grim, and they had to change some of the lyrics, and they had to make it work, because at the time, whatever James was on or writing about was just not working.
Right.
So they found a way to change it up.
Well, I mean, he was just continuing on with, the formula.
Yeah.
More than likely.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so, the second single, released in late October of 91, The Unforgiven. Would it be safe to call this a departure of sorts?
It was, in a way. We'll mark that for edit. It started slow, it builds up right, and it kind of, it does the ebb and flow, the peaks and valleys of sound. Of all the songs on this album, this is the one that I more can take or leave, because it really depends on my mood.
Yes.
To listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
That and Sandman, because Sandman's just everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, Unforgiven was one of those tunes where I was like, meh. Unforgiven 2, believe it or not, was the song that I liked more.
Okay.
That was the one time where the sequel made more sense, or sonically made me happier than the original Unforgiven.
Right.
In terms of views, though, 372 million according to Warner Waltz
Wow.
on YouTube. Craziness.
Yes. Um, the third single, we continue with the borderline power ballad theme with Nothing Else Matters. Um, this song got played at my senior prom.
Yes.
I can't take
Dude,
credit for
amazing.
requesting it. I don't know who did or whether the DJ was just like, I gotta play something a little heavier here other than NSYNC and Britney Spears, but yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. I remember being a kid at summer camp and like trying to figure out guitar riffs and stuff. And I talked about on the load reflecting that it was Mama Said with the D minor chord that I was trying to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to Nothing Else Matters, and I just remember messing around with the guitar, sitting in the cabin, and all of a sudden I realized like, oh, that's the riff,
Yeah.
and it's all open strings, and I didn't know any better,
Yeah.
so I was playing around with that, and yeah, that song, that's new territory for Metallica, because that was it was a ballad, and a
Mm-hmm.
ballad was not a Metallica thing, and
Yeah.
James didn't even want that song to be made because like he was missing people in his life, and he wrote it in a hotel room, and all of a sudden someone heard him playing it and they were like, you should do this, the
Yeah.
song should be brought to the album, and he didn't want to do it, he brought it in, he didn't want it released, and then Kirk at the time was like, why are you writing a love letter to your girlfriend? This is so weak. He thought it was lame. And that's Kirk Hammett, who's like the most emotional member of the band. And at the
Right.
time, he was like, this is so stupid.
Yeah.
But it had perfect crossover appeal. You talk about like they
Yes.
played the song at your graduation, like that's crossover.
Yeah.
I had people in my class who listened to nothing but pop music when I was in high school. They loved that song.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the beginning of the mainstream crossover appeal for Metallica. It was that song. It wasn't Enter Sandman. It wasn't nothing. It was Nothing Else Matters. That was the song.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really love that song. I think it's just a great song. Fourth single released.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
965 million views on YouTube for Nothing Else Matters.
So basically
that's
a billion with a B.
That yeah, well, and the only one that really trumps that is November Rain by Guns N' Roses. That video is 1.6 billion with a B views. So that's how big Nothing Else Matters is with a capital B.
Yeah.
So that I wanted to put that out
Yeah.
there as we move forward.
That's a great stat. The fourth single released October of '92, so we're over a year into the album cycle. Wherever I May Roam. Again, just
I love that song.
yes, such a. I love the. That's a sitar at the beginning, is it not?
Yes, it is, and it's played perfectly with the ambiance of the room, and just the song itself. Just it lends to the song. It doesn't take away from it. It makes sense. And at that point, you talk about a year into the album cycle. They're already out touring on the album. They're a year in of what's going to become 3 years on the road for that record. So like they have to keep cranking out hits from that record, and they do.
Yeah.
So at the time, yeah, this is huge for them.
Well, yeah, that's a great song. Just I love the way that everything kind of just drops out at the beginning of the verse, and it's just the drums, and just it's great song. We're gonna sound like broken records here because it's just like, oh, this is a great song, but it is.
It holds up. 30 years later, it holds up. We're gonna see this throughout the entire record. This is the first record where James learns how to sing, where he's not screaming, where he's not just trying for that high pitched, like he's singing, and you can tell. And so for the Unforgiven, he's doing it. Nothing Else Matters, he's singing, like he's actually emoting through his singing, and that's a whole new world for James too.
Yeah,
I think that's worth discussing, because before he wasn't in that zone.
Yeah,
he wasn't as emotionally attached to these songs as he becomes starting with the Black Album.
Yeah, well, and didn't he? Maybe it was after this, but wasn't there a point where he had some sort of voice issue, where he's like, okay, I got to change kind of my style?
I
Or am I
believe so,
imagining
yeah,
that?
because he had started to develop polyps. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was given a tape, and yeah, it's on the some
Some
kind of
kind of, yes.
monster.
Okay. Yeah.
He's playing the background tape and he's singing with it. Yeah, I never forget that. So yeah, that started around that time.
Yeah. And then the last single released in February of 93. So we are a year and a half after the release of this album and we're still cranking out singles. Sad but true. Um the other minor wrestling connection is this this song is sampled in the American Badass Kid Rock song, which was the Undertaker's theme for a short time. So,
Oh, good point. I had never thought of that.
yeah.
Good stuff. I like it. Yeah, that I mean, listen, it's a great song. It's a song that it's in D standard, which
Mm-hmm.
to Metallica was brand new territory.
Yes.
I think they had done a couple others in drop D or in some sort of configuration. They've
Yeah.
done E flat once or twice. So they do D. They learn Sad But True in E, and that's the riff, but it's not hitting. It's not working. And all of a sudden, uh, Bob Rock again is like, well, why don't you just tune it down to D? And it blows their mind that Metallica was like, well, E is like the lowest note you can get on the fretboard. And he plays them the Dr. Feelgood album. He's like, no, this is in D.
Yeah.
And suddenly Metallica realizes that they can tune their guitars down to get a heavier sound. So
Yeah.
for better or worse, you can thank Bob Rock for saying anger. But the point is here, he tunes it down to D and they do Sad But True. And the song hits and it becomes a monster
Mm-hmm.
of a riff. And next thing you know, they're like, oh, that's it. Can't change that. So that was the story of D standard for Metallica and how it like completely blew their minds as guitar players.
A lot has been said over the years about Lars' snare drum, whether it's the sound of it on the Saint Anger album that you mentioned earlier, or his over reliance on it.
Yeah.
In the later years, but just the da 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 before all the singing. It's just and then the lyric, especially that last verse, where this is where James is. He's borderline screaming where he's like, "Hate, I'm your hate. I'm your hate when you want love." Just that, just a, God, yeah, that's the stuff right there.
Yeah, somebody pricked James in the butt for that last verse and was
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you're just totally just talked complete nonsense in his ear, made him so angry to the point where he unleashed in that last verse." I love it. You're right. It's just perfect for that song.
Yes. So those are the singles. So as we look through the rest of the album, I think it's safe to say that neither of us really have a quote unquote low point on this album.
No, like I said, Unforgiven is not my favorite song. That doesn't mean that it wasn't a great song. It's not the song that I go out of my way to listen to on the album versus the others.
Yes.
The rest of it, yeah, everything just kind of stands out.
Mm-hmm. I think if I had to pick, like you have to pick one that you think isn't quite on par with the rest. I guess I would be forced to say The Struggle Within. Because it's not, I don't have the same, I mean, it's the least, let me make sure it's the song that's been streamed the least on Spotify. It's just, but it's a good song. So like I said, I'm not going to say that, but if I was forced to, that would probably be the one I would be like, yeah, that's probably not my favorite, but it's not bad by any means.
I love that you're talking about it being the least played song on Spotify. And as I look at it, it's like 16 million plays.
Yes.
That's the least. And it is the least. I mean, next up is The God That Failed, and that's 25 million. That's still like ample song. It's ridiculous.
Which kills me. Because
yeah, exactly.
Again, because as we talked about last time with King Nothing, we get Jason
Right up.
Yeah. Jason getting to shine here right at the God That Failed just kicks off with with him and that great that great bass line. I was playing it at rehearsal the other day because I'm just like, it's
Yes.
just it's simple, but it's effective.
It's funny, whereas you were doing The God That Failed, I was doing My Friend of Misery because I love that high fret,
Oh
that just
yes.
plucking,
Mm-hmm.
that perfect riff for me. And that was a James song. Sorry, that was a Jason song. He had written a whole thing. There's a video out there on YouTube you can find afterwards where he talks about what the original My Friend of Misery was going to sound like had it been done his way. But the way they ended up making it was perfect. Like
Yeah.
for the song, it's great. So it's again another song that kind of sleeps on the album. People don't always pay much attention to it, but it's so heavy. A lot of a lot of the sound, it has sonic heaviness, and what that
Mm-hmm.
means is just it's so deep and it
Yeah.
rattles in your ears while you're listening to it. It's not high pitched and buzzy. It's got a sonic stage where when you're wearing headphones, you're not just seeing this, you're feeling this,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the making of a good album. And this album has that sonic stage that sits perfectly for just about every song on the record.
Mm-hmm. I love the end of My Friend Misery, where Kirk's got, I don't know if he's got his wah pedal going or what, but where he takes the main riff and goes up way up high with it, and just I just love it.
Yeah.
So, um, they as more mainstream as they got on this album, they still have their bangers, so to speak. Holier Than Thou is just punch you in the face.
Yeah, that riff alone is
Yes.
enough to like just remind you. It's like, hey, listen, do we sound a little bit different? Do we sound a little bit older? Yeah, but do we still know how to punch you in the face? Goddamn right.
Yes.
That song. Absolutely, that is it for sure.
Um, and then same with of Wolf and Man is just a great heavy song.
Bob hated that song, by the way,
Really?
because he was like, I don't get the premise. He's like, I don't know. I think it's the idea of a wolf transforming into a man. I don't
Mm-hmm.
get it. I don't like it. It's out of the realm of possibility. Therefore, it's not for me. But then he started to realize like that it's an honest and organic building song. And he saw what James was kind of trying to say in the lyrics.
Yeah.
And so they kind of workshopped it and they made it good enough that it was there for release. And he's like, I hope it makes enough sense.
Yeah.
And it is like it works perfectly. And again, we talked about S&M being the perfect partner to load if you're trying to make sense of the album or trying to make it sound better. This is another song where adding the S&M, the symphony orchestra to Of Wolf and Man, it
Yes.
becomes a totally different tune.
Yeah.
And it's such a better song, in my opinion, when you pair it with a symphony.
I just love that riff, that dun 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 dun
Yeah.
dun, just really cool. And then Don't Tread on Me. It was funny. As a kid, as I mentioned before, my dad had this album, and I would always when I did it with his LPs, and I did it with his CDs too. I would just go through all of them and not listen to them. I would just look at the front and the back, and just kind of just look at the artwork and stuff like that. And I remember looking at the track listing and thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with the super group of Damn Yankees.
Oh, very minimal, but go ahead.
Yeah, their second album was titled "Don't Tread on Me," and it was the first single off that album. So I'm like, wait a minute, Metallica did a Damn Yankees song? That's weird.
Uh,
Definitely not. Definitely very different, but very good all the same. So
yeah, that song has always kind of struck a chord with me. I mean, I'm not an American, so that part of it doesn't do it, but just the riff itself
yeah.
and just the passion that's in that song,
Mm-hmm.
100%. I mean, the whole record has a lot of these Americana, um, don't tread on me vibes, right? They use the snake from the flag. I can't remember what the flag is called, but the yellow
Yeah.
flag with the snake, and
Yes.
yeah, and the don't tread on me, like that's all over the place. Like the snake is on the album cover,
Yes.
in its own little shiny thing. Which, by the way, I love the fact that like the way James explains the album cover is just like, here it is, black sleeve, black logo, F you.
Yeah.
And that's it.
It's one of the few times where a band, like, it seems like instead of Spinal Tap taking the piss and parodying, metal, this is the other way around, because it's kind of like the smell of the glove. It's like, how much more black could it get?
They had already parodied themselves. That was the problem, because they did, and Justice had Lady Liberty, and it was very cartoonish, and Master Puppets was the same thing. Even Kill 'Em All had that same Ride the Lightning. They all had very cartoony, amazing looking artwork, very good for mounting on your wall. But they were trying for something new, and they were trying to be a little darker, a little dirtier.
Mm-hmm.
So they got to this and they're just like, forget it, it's all black.
Yeah.
And it's self-titled and it's grungy, because guess what? Grunge is coming, and they had to know.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to have known what Nirvana was working on, because at the time, like you said, the album releases a month later. So if they don't know through the wires, through the entertainment industry, if they don't know what's coming alongside the Black Album, then what are we doing here?
Yeah,
and I think they
exactly.
knew, and I think they just said, we're going to be straightforward to the point, and we're not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
This is what it is. And it worked.
Um,
Clearly it worked.
I think the only other song we haven't really touched on is Through the Never. So do you have any
I love that fucking riff. I do. I really do. I mean, just the way that it, again, you gotta go punch you in the face, and it hits. God. And it's so straightforward and
Yeah.
silly, but like the way you can't really count it in properly the first time.
Yeah.
And then the drums come in and it's a beat off, and all of a sudden it's like, well, okay.
I have that problem with Sad But
and
True.
it all comes together
After the intro.
Yeah. You got to count the one and then come in.
Yeah.
So it's Through the Never, though, it's so disjointed until everyone's in together. Yeah. So in that first 30 seconds, you have no idea. You're confused, but the riff is cool. And then all of a sudden we're in, and it's like, oh, there it is. Mm-hmm. And the song just kind of hits you in a way that for me has always been like, this is dark. I like it.
Yes.
I want more of this.
And the other thing that kind of shines on this album is Jason's background vocals.
Yeah. And that was something he hadn't really done much before.
Yeah. So
he finally sings.
Yeah. So, and it just kind of adds something to the to the
we're
presentation.
Talking about yeah. So we're talking about the album coming out, and then they have a bunch of singles that come out within the year and a half, and that they're on tour for 3 years straight.
Yeah.
Do you want to know why they really went on tour for 3 years straight?
Why is that, Joel?
When they recorded this album, Lars, Kirk, and Jason, Lars, Kirk, and Jason were going through divorces. And they were trying to process it. And they're single guys on the road. They got nothing better to do. So what do? We're on this ridiculous cash cow, huge, just gangbusters album. Keep going. And listen, it's going to affect them. That's when Alcoholica becomes the thing. And they're going nuts town to town, and they're doing what they want. Because guess what? 3/4 of the band are absolutely footloose, fancy free. And the only guy who isn't is the front man. And you'd think the front man is the guy who wants to get into it the most. And whether he does or not is another story. But the point is, they're in that phase where they're ultimate bachelors with a lot of money that they've suddenly come into because they've seen huge success from this record. So that's why they go on the road for 3 years straight.
Yeah.
They have to tour, they have to do it, but they're also having a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
Now,
is this the album cycle where they do the joint tour with Guns N' Roses, or is that before?
That is the tour. That's 92.
Okay. And
that's also when James gets burned in Montreal.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's what I thought.
That was 92.
So.
And then they brought on
and you want
Marshall, who was their guitar tech, to play a few of the rhythm tracks live.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because Guns N' Roses has their, own. They got Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 comes out a month after this, so, and then they're on tour for forever, and they're dealing with their own issues. So.
Yeah.
But
and again, you go back to Bob Rock, and you go back to this is his seminal album. This is the Bob Rock album, because as good as Dr. Feelgood was, this is obviously
Yes.
that much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Rock just took a band that was on the cusp of making it big and made them big again in Metallica, or
Mm-hmm.
made them huge.
Yeah.
And he does the same thing in the 2000s with The Offspring. And he does Rise and Fall, Rage and Grace, and that record ends up doing gangbusters because they picked up Bob Rock, and it was the original Offspring sound, but it was brought into a new territory. It was brought into kind of a more modern feel. So Bob has his finger on the pulse. Of course, we talked about Bob not wanting to work with Metallica after the first record, and James being like, "I never want to work with that MFer again." And next thing you know, they do 3 more albums together.
Yeah. 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 So, is there anything else? Just kind of looking.
I think we covered so much of it.
I know. I don't think so, but yeah. So, any closing statements then?
I mean, this record is iconic. It's going to be forever and ever. It had so many moments of difference for Metallica. It wasn't a commercial success because of random factors. They came in and they wanted to make it so. James wanted to make it a cleaned up album with less long-windedness. He didn't like Injustice. He didn't like the way it sounded. He didn't want to be self-indulgent. He didn't want to be showing off. And he wanted to prove that he can be succinct. And bringing in Bob Rock was a game changer. He was a guy with a proven track record. There are a lot of things that like brought Metallica and the Black Album into its prominence, but a lot of things were more planned than I think people understand and realize. It wasn't just big metal band makes it big overnight.
Right.
There was planning.
Is it because not this? Obviously, they were successful even before this. They were, the preeminent metal band, but they didn't have anything like this on their hands. Is it? So I hate to use starving artists because I don't think that's where they were at this point. But is it a case, just for the sake of my point, is it a case of the starving artist not wanting to be starving anymore?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to look at it as well. They were sick of going on tours that got them fed but didn't keep them afloat.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a problem now that we see with musicians, is that it's no longer the music that makes you the money. It's the tours and the merch and everything surrounding it. And that's what sucks sometimes.
Selling
that
VIP packages and
it's no longer the music you make. The music you make is now a vessel to get you on the road that gets you paid.
Yes.
Whereas back in the day, your touring it got you paid, but it was the album sales that did it.
The touring was done to promote the album.
Yeah, and you didn't have to go out for 3 years. Yeah. But guys like Metallica could, because at the time, we talked about it, their personal lives made it so. Well, they could have easily said 1 year and said, we're going to go back to the studio and work on load and reload. Which, for the better.
Like, and it started to slow down here by the early 90s, but, 70s and 80s, like, bands were cranking out sometimes 2 albums a year.
Yeah, it was easy to get out there and put your music there and get play.
So
it's changed dramatically. And you and I, who both, play instruments and play in bands and understand some of the problems that persist with the music industry now, it's tough to make a living out there. And it's tough to make a living on your art unless you're willing to sacrifice a lot of time, a lot of personal expense, and put yourself out there in a way that's not always comfortable. Whereas back in those days, you could go into the studio, hide for months, put your album out, maybe tour on it for 6 months to a year, and then start the cycle again.
Yeah.
And in that cycle, you would have family time. You could be away, but it was different. Now it's you're out as far as often as you can. You're out because that's the only way you survive.
Yep.
I don't think that's really fair these days.
No.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
Yeah. Joel, where can people find you?
Everyone can find me on all forms of social media at Joel Pearl, JoelPearl. I'm on Twitch, twitch.tv/Joel Pearl. As the pandemic kind of starts winding up, I don't know when I'll be on the road again, but for now, if you see me on Twitch, I'm either playing music, playing bass, hanging out with y'all. I know Chris is in the chat often enough hanging out with us, and I appreciate that all the time. We're doing that, or I'm playing Mario because I'm a big Mario nerd. That's That's me. If you want to talk wrestling, I every single Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern and every single Sunday at noon Eastern, I host a show called Tim and Joel Call It in the Ring, where myself and my co-host Tim talk about the week in wrestling. Sometimes it is schmaz of nothingness, and sometimes it is absolute serious news and rumors and all that stuff. Tim is a newer wrestling fan, so I get to be the guy who kind of leads him through it, and he gives me his take as a new fan, which I love, and it's totally different from
It's a
what a
fun
lot of people
show.
talk
It's a
about.
fun. I usually
Thank you.
I catch the audio. Um,
Oh, you're one of the audio guys.
I am.
Hooray.
I am. I'm. That's why. That's in full transparency. That's why I started releasing the audio of my videos, because I'm like, I can't in good conscience tell people to sit and watch my videos when you know, would much, it's just easier. It's more digestible for me to listen while I'm
I hear you.
working. So,
Yeah. No, that's great. I appreciate that. That's so cool to hear. Thank
but
you.
yeah, no, I really enjoy your and Tim's dynamic together. So,
Comes from years of not really talking to each other outside of our friends. We've had similar circles, but he and I, when we realized we were both wrestling fans and bass players as well, we were like, we should probably do something about this. And
yeah,
here we are talking about wrestling like
there
a
you
bunch of
go.
dorks.
And you do stuff with the Fightful Twitch too.
Yes, I do. I am on Fightful for those who are wrestling fans. I work with Fightful on their Twitch stuff. I sometimes pop up on their YouTube, the post shows and stuff. Twitch.tv/Fightful Gaming. I really want to change that handle though. We'll get there someday because we don't game much. We do everything there but game. Once in a blue moon, Jeremy Lambert and I will go on and we'll play NHL hits.
Yeah,
Other than that, we mostly just talk, watch, interact. I host we watch Impact Wrestling and I host a watch along there. So not much gaming these
you do
days when it
drafts.
comes to that.
Do
Yeah,
drafts.
we do drafts on a Friday night at like midnight.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the kind of crazy content people want, so we give it to them.
There you
So
go.
that's Fightful Gaming. Thank you for reminding me, because Fightful is always there, but I sometimes forget that not everybody knows about Fightful.
Well, and as we're recording this, you're the reigning, defending, undisputed Fightful champion.
It ain't changing as long as these borders are closed. Ain't no one taking this title.
That's awesome. All right.
Thanks again for having me do this.
Oh,
I love the
no,
show. Thank you, Chris. This is
Thank
fun
you
for
for
me.
doing it, man. It's great. So I enjoy talking to you about music. So
Same here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
one of these days I will get you on for a wrestling show, though.
Nah, I don't like wrestling.
All right. You can find me on Twitter at IbanezChris, Facebook.com/music and moonsalts. And yeah, so until next time, guys, see ya.